Hey, so our last group for this block is going to be Ashley's group. And so
before we start, I just want to say congrats to everybody who already went. Both your presentations were awesome. And we'll get started. So good morning, everyone. Today our group will be presenting our research study titled Perceptions of Adolescents and Young Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorder on Their Performance of Daily Living Skills. I'm Sofia Martini, and I'm here with Bridget Bosch, Allison Karlin, Karlee Kesselring, Gabby Mihale, Keanna Morales, and Samantha Springer, and our faculty advisor is Dr. Ashley Mason. Briefly, I'll just show you a schedule of what we're going to go over today in our presentation.
Autism spectrum disorder is a complex neurodevelopmental condition with deficits in areas of social communication, social interaction, speech, restrictive behaviors, repetitive behaviors, and unique interests and activities. Symptoms and severity can vary and present differently in each person. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's most recent study in 2018 found that approximately 1 in 59 children in the United States have ASD. Research has shown that development of daily living skills is more challenging for those with ASD. They display lower participation levels in ADLs and IADLs at home, in school, and in the community compared to same age, typically developing peers. Adolescents specifically have trouble with personal hygiene, managing medications, laundry, preparing meals, budgeting for purchases, and navigating the community. Our study also looked at transitional services. Transitional services help young adults transition into adulthood by building their independence so they have the ability to function outside of the public education system.
Our team decided to guide our research project using two models, the conceptual model looking at the impact of living with ASD and PEOP, person, environment, occupational performance. The conceptual model highlights core and associated symptoms which impact ADLs, IADLs, and health management. These are the three domains our study included, and this is also how we sectioned off our survey. The model highlights the physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms that affect a child's school, work, and social life. It also impacts family or caregivers. We use this model as a reference to help us support and get an idea of the perspectives of adolescents and young adults with ASD. The second model, PEOP, is more client-centered, taking into consideration the interaction of intrinsic personal skills and barriers provided by the environment. Unlike the previous model, this takes into account outside factors such as social and physical environments. We as OTs know the importance of considering context when evaluating our clients' performance. The four elements in this model describe what people want and need to do in their daily lives, the actual ability to perform these tasks, and how personal factors combined with the demands of the context in which occupations are undertaken influence performance. We found literature reviews that concluded positive correlations between the person and the environment in supporting the valued occupation. This leads to success in occupational performance, leading to an overall increase in well-being and participation.
So moving on to our purpose and rationale, the purpose of our study is to fill the gap in literature so that occupational therapists and other healthcare practitioners can better understand the perceptions of functioning in adolescents and young adults with ASD. Additionally, we feel that their voices should be heard and shared in order to better support them. We also want to highlight areas that are reported with more difficulty to inform practitioners of these challenges to better support them during times of transition and improve their daily lives. Our rationale for creating this study was to gain knowledge directly from young adults and adolescents with ASD. We felt that creating this study can help gain a better understanding of the barriers and supports they face in regards to ADLs, IADLs, and health management tasks. It can also help gain more insight into how adolescents and young adults perceive their level of function on their performance in these areas. The research question that we created for the study was, how do adolescents and young adults with ASD perceive their engagement in ADLs, IADLs, and health management in relation to their identified barriers and supports? Along with our research question, we created 7 sub-questions that further aim to answer this research question. These address relationships between ADLs, IADLs, and health management, and correlations between perceived levels of engagement with our participants. These sub-questions will be answered later on in our presentation.
Now we will be going on into the methods of our study. Those included met the following criteria. Individuals between the ages of 12 and 21 with an official diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. They spoke fluent English and had not yet received a high school diploma. Our research study was approved by the Ithaca College IRB, and all records related to the study were stored electronically on an encrypted password-protected computer. Participants were recruited using online flyers, social media sites, and scripted emails that were sent to schools, social groups, and autism centers. Caregivers of the participants were able to help them complete the survey. An online and self-administered survey was used. This was a 44-item survey that included multiple choice questions, Likert rating scales, and optional write-in responses. As you heard earlier in the presentation, questions in our study were related to ADLs, IADLs, and health management tasks. Some of the ADLs that participants were asked about included teeth brushing, hand washing, toileting, while some IADLs included money management, shopping, using public transportation, and driving. The newly outlined domain of the OTPF4 is health management, and the tasks that were included specifically in our survey included managing emotions, communication with healthcare providers, medication management, maintaining physical health, and nutrition.
Again, our anonymous online survey was distributed through Qualtrics. After the survey closed, our research team examined responses to determine validity and consistency with answers. We collected and input our data into Excel and gave all survey items a variable name. We omitted any question items that our participants skipped and did not include those in the analysis of our data. We used descriptive statistics to analyze our data when looking at the occupations of each participant, their barriers and support systems, and formulate descriptions of relationships between their perceived level of support and perceived level of occupational independence. We received 9 complete survey responses. 2 of those were completed with or by parents or caregivers. 7 of them were completed by adolescents or young adults with ASD. 1 participant was between the ages of 12 to 14 years old, 2 between 15 and 17 years old, and 6 participants were between 18 and 21 years old. We received 4 responses from female identifying participants, and 5 were male identifying.
So again, how do adolescents and young adults with ASD perceive their engagement in ADLs, IADLs, and health management in relation to their identified barriers and supports? As far as our results, the 7 sub-questions we came up with were aimed to answer this guiding question. We're now going to dive deeper into each sub-question and discuss what we found from the survey.
Our first question was, what types of occupations do adolescents and young adults with ASD engage in independently? Our results concluded that toileting and hand washing were the top 2 occupations completed independently. 8 out of 9 participants responded that they do not need any help completing both of these activities. Second, 7 out of 9 participants also rated that they do not need help completing dressing or cleaning up after eating independently.
Question 2 focused specifically on barriers that this population reported they face in each of these 3 sections of occupations. In terms of ADLs, the most common response was other for barriers. These had a lot of write-in answers. Some of them said things like, these tasks are all easy for me, or nothing makes these tasks hard unless I'm feeling lazy. In regards to IADLs, the most commonly noted barriers were that participants felt unsafe doing the activity or that they hadn't had enough practice with that occupation. And one added in the write-in portion that it can be hard to do these types of occupations when they're doing them for the first time without any guidance. And then lastly, in terms of health management, we saw the most barriers here. of the 3 subcategories, and participants reported that these activities were either difficult to remember to complete, had too many steps to remember, or that they again hadn't had enough practice with these occupations. And another participant added that it gets hard when you have to do these things consistently.
In the survey, we asked about the frequency of use of transitional services by each participant. As you can see in the table, we included OT, PT, SLP, ABA, and psychological therapy as choices for the participants to choose from. We also provided an other option if the participant was receiving another form of transitional services, as well as receives no services if they were not receiving any help. These services were compared throughout 3 age groups, as you can see in the table. Overall, SLP was used by 5 out of the 9 participants, and ABA was used by only 1. Additionally, PT, SLP, and psychological therapy were reported being used once in the 15 to 17 age category, and in the 18 to 21 age category, OT was used by 3 participants, and SLP was used by 4.
This figure shows the results to question 4, which was, what is the frequency of how well participants perceive they engage in occupations? As you can see, many of the participants perceive that they complete ADLs extremely well. For example, 6 out of 9 participants feel that they complete hand washing and toileting extremely well. The blue color closest to the bottom represents extremely well, and you can see on the side in the key what every other color represents. There was more variation in participants' perceived level of engagement for IADLs compared to ADLs. One of the most important points to make for this is that 4 out of 9 participants do not use public transportation, and 5 out of 9 do not engage in driving. The results varied on a more individual basis for health management. For example, medication management had levels of perceived engagement in all categories, ranging from does not apply to extremely well.
Our 5th sub-question asks what type of help was required to complete activities. To gather the results for this question, we divided the types of help that were being used throughout each category, which is ADLs, IADLs, and health management tasks. Each graph represents a different area with the type of help that the participant chose. The levels of help that are represented on each graph is 1 being I don't need any help, 2 I need some help, 3 I need a lot of help, 4 I don't complete this activity, and 5 I'm unsure how to answer. From our results, the most reported type of help was I don't need any help doing this activity when completing ADLs, and this can be seen on figure 2. Similarly to ADLs, I don't need any help doing this activity was reported the most for individuals completing IADLs, and this is represented on figure 3. Additionally, participants reported needing a lot of help in the area of health management, specifically for communication and nutrition, and this is represented on figure 4. So overall, our results found that participants reported needing no help for completing most ADLs and IADLs and needing the most help in areas of health management.
Question 6, is there a relationship between average level of help and average level of perceived performance? There may be a low relationship between the level of help an adolescent with ASD receives for an occupation and their level of perceived performance for that occupation. Due to the small sample size, we are unable to conclude that a correlation exists between the average level of help needed to complete an occupation and the average perceived performance level for that occupation. However, these scatter plots can show us trends in data for possible relationships. For example, in Figure 5 ADLs, the participants report engagement in occupations independently or close to independently with little help needed to complete these activities. In Figure 6 IADLs, the participants reported more assistance with more activities. And in Figure 7 health management was more varied with relationships to help and perceived performance.
Our last question inquired if participants with higher number of support systems also have the highest perceived level of performance. We define support systems to include parents or guardians, siblings, friends, teachers, or aides who may help them on a daily basis. We concluded no, the number of supports and perceived level of performance varied. For example, participant H reported 5 support systems, which was the most out of all participants, and they noted that they overall complete most daily occupations at moderately well, even with their support. On the other hand, participant D perceived themselves at the highest level of performance, but only had 3 types of support systems. And considering the other participants, the individuals who had the lowest perceived level of performance respectively had 1 to 2 support systems. One thing to consider in these results is that we did not ask, nor did we have the ability to measure the quality of these support systems, which can be an influential factor in how their support system impacts their perceived level of performance.
So after analyzing our results, we came up with a few discussion points that we felt were important to acknowledge. So the first is that our results do align with the previous research. And so, as mentioned earlier, we often see that ADLs are taught and improved upon at a young age. And our results mirrored this, as our respondents had the highest performance scores and the least help needed with these ADL occupations. Additionally, they reported the least barriers to these occupations. And then in terms of IADLs, we saw more barriers and lower performance scores than we did with ADLs. And we know that IADL occupations are higher in complexity. They require more complex thinking and organizational skills and rely on a combination of social interaction, communication, and transitions, which can be difficult for people with ASD. And then lastly, we saw the most barriers to performance and the lowest performance scores in health management. And while there's little research on this occupation specifically, we know that it's a newly identified domain for the OT practice.
So like we said before, PEOP model is a client-centered approach to theory, taking into account external factors and how they are connected to personal skills and barriers. For people with ASD, dysfunction occurs due to deficits in abilities and skills such as communication skills, ability to engage socially, restrictive barriers such as something having too many steps to remember, not enough practice, or feeling unsafe, lack of resources in the environment such as support systems and accommodating spaces, which can also be related to systemic issues such as socioeconomic status and family units that influence the resources that one has access to, which is something we did not inquire about in our survey. Overcoming these barriers will lead to a person being able to participate in the home and the community.
In the survey, we did not explicitly define the services participants reported as transitional services. Transitional services for autistic youth and young adults exist to help prepare them for the transition from living at home with family or caregivers to living independently. These services are designed to focus on improving academic and functional achievement through the use of professionals, including PT, SLP, psychological therapy, ABA, and OT. At this stage in life, transitional services can be very beneficial. OTs can help these individuals learn the skills and the tools they need to transition from the educational system into adulthood.
We want to acknowledge that COVID-19 has greatly impacted our own daily habits, routines, and occupations, and have also impacted those for people with ASD. For some, the pandemic may have caused a greater disruption. However, for others, it may have enabled them to more efficiently and effectively go about their daily occupations. Therefore, having distributed this survey in the midst of this pandemic, the responses we received may not be reflective of the day-to-day functioning prior to the pandemic or even post-pandemic, but rather more specific to their engagement in this historical context.
We'd also like to mention some of the strengths and limitations of our study. So first, in terms of strengths, we were sure to include the voices of individuals with ASD who are often spoken for or spoken over. And they were able to share their perceptions on their daily functioning with us when they took our survey. And then we also had input from an autistic adult when we made our survey, who was able to read through it and give us feedback that helped us to restructure it as we moved along in that process. And then in terms of limitations, first was our small sample size. As we noted before, we just had 9 participants who fully completed the survey. And this may have been due to the fact that our survey was long and intricate. And so we'd like to acknowledge that this likely made the survey inaccessible to some individuals within our target population.
And now to conclude our presentation, I'm going to address some implications we came up with for occupational therapy. OT should address concerns for each client individually because barriers can differ from person to person. For example, some worry about safety and others struggle with remembering steps to tasks. To help this population transition after high school, OTs should help with health management occupations like managing emotions. Many of our participants reported barriers in this new outlined domain of the OTPF4, so advocating for programs that will address health management occupations for this population will be very beneficial. Often those with ASD are not as independent as their typically developing same-aged peers, so advocating for OT in schools to support students as they go through life transitions can help to ensure services are sustainable beyond the conclusion of therapy. OTs can also support people with ASD by educating other professionals on how they can better support this population. And lastly, we think further research is needed, specifically looking at the perceptions of adolescents and young adults with ASD due to the lack of research we found on this topic. And then these are our references. And we just want to say thank you all for listening, and a big thank you to Ashley Mason, our faculty advisor, for helping us with everything over the past year. And now we'll take any questions anyone may have.
Congratulations, that was great. Another interesting topic. I loved that we're doing such a good job of having the folks in the community speak for themselves. So that was a great addition too. So any questions? Any from the chat, Jenna? Any hands?
I don't see anything in the chat yet, but I see Kim's hand.
Let's see, I see Kim and Shannon. Let's start with Kim and then we'll go to Shannon.
Hi, another great presentation, as Michelle pointed out, or Dr. Bradshaw pointed out. I just had a question about, you mentioned that you thought that the length of the survey may have limited its accessibility. And I was curious what your thoughts were about how you might access this population in an ideal world if you were able to do so. What might be some suggestions you might have for future researchers?
I can take this one. I think that something we've been talking about a lot is how like lived experiences and anecdotes are just as important evidence as a survey with a large sample size. And so I think in the future, qualitative research with some sort of like interviews that are more in depth with the person that can fit their accessibility needs would be important moving forward. So I think that's something that could happen further research-wise.
Great, thanks.
And then Shannon, if you want to ask your question aloud, the floor is yours. Oh, looks like Shannon. And if we want to make sure that Shannon has...
She's got it. Yep.
You do? Okay.
Oh, it says that you can unmute.
Oh, sorry. All right. It helps if I actually read the box that pops up, right? Actually, sorry about that. Really, really, really good research we're looking at this morning. I'm just beaming as far as how proud I am about of everybody. But I did have a question. You talked about the services the transitional services that these individuals received as far as one time versus, 2 times. I didn't know if you captured any information about the length of those services and or when during their development they received those services, whether they were during those transitional periods when they would have been most helpful. I just want a little bit more information about that if you had it.
So sadly, that was something we noticed after we collected our results and realizing that we did not inquire when they were receiving them, if they were current or in the past or anything about duration. So sadly, all we have is just the fact that they have at one point in time received those services that we identified.
If I could also just add on to what Keanna said, there's like so much that I think we wish we could have asked, but our survey itself was already so long. So it would have been awesome if like we could have asked more. But I think it's definitely something that people working with this or researching this population further could ask.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, just the point being too, that's where the learning comes in with all research, right? After you start evaluating your things, you're like, ooh, I wish I'd asked, but yeah, length certainly is a consideration. So thank you both.
Any other questions popping up? Jenna has a question.
Happen to have a question. Yeah, great job again, presenters and students. This was a really really strong research study, and I really enjoyed hearing your findings and your thoughts in the discussion. One question I had is, I'm thinking kind of broadly about the idea of like independence in OT and kind of how we conceptualize that. And I heard a lot about like independence as doing on one's own, like by yourself without help. And I was wondering if there was any part of your survey, or even like if you were to, do this type of research in the future, any thoughts about independence as participants' satisfaction or autistic individuals' satisfaction with their own participation, or even if they, it supports them to participate if they have co-occupations or support in that way. Any thoughts about that? Did that question even make sense? I'm not sure if that came out right. Yeah.
Jenna, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but when we did ask them what types of help that they used to complete an occupation, we had all different types of options. So one might have been that they actually completed it with another person, but we also had things like, oh, I use like visual reminders, or I use cues from another person. And then their actual independence was its own separate question. So they were able to select that they used a certain type of help, but then still give themselves a full independence rating on how they performed that occupation.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that.
Any final questions? No. So I'm not seeing anyone. Good job, everyone. We're going to take a break. The next presenters, if you'll join the link at 10:45, we'll get started there. And guest attendees, a little bit before 11, we'll let folks in. I'll do a little introduction for the new folks, any new folks coming, about the questions and accessibility, and then we'll get started for block 2. Thank you so much.